are some truths you don't waste on people who've already shown you exactly who they are. The first time Alexis promised she'd never leave me, we were 22, and happy with the little we had, sitting on the floor of an empty apartment eating noodles straight out of the pot. "I don't care if we never have a dime," she said. "I'm yours through anything." But 9 years later, she wheeled a suitcase past me, and out the door of a house she'd started calling a prison, toward a man waiting by a car that gleamed under the streetlight. And she didn't say a word about anything. And when I kept asking questions, she'd told me I was broke. She'd told me I was going nowhere. "I can't keep doing this, Malcolm," she said. "I've given you my best years, and I've got nothing to show for it. I am not carrying a broke man to my grave. Kincaid never got me anything," she told me, suitcase already packed in the doorway of the house I'd bought us. 9 years, and I can't use it anywhere. What's the point of a name that won't open a single door? If you've ever been called worthless by someone with no idea what you are actually worth, this story is for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me where you're watching from. To understand how the girl who ate noodles on the floor with me became the woman who wheeled a suitcase to another man's car, you have to go all the way back to a library in October, in the last year of college, when I dropped a stack of books and she was the only person who stopped to help me pick them up. Her name was Alexis Monroe then. She was studying marketing, and she laughed like she wasn't worried about anybody hearing it. And when she found out I was the quiet one from her economics section who never spoke up, she decided that was a problem she was going to fix. She fixed it over cheap coffee and worse pizza. She fixed it walking me home in the cold. By the time winter came, I could not remember what my life had sounded like before her laugh was in it. I was not much to look at on paper back then. I had a scholarship, a part-time job stocking shelves, and a head full of ideas I couldn't afford to build. What I had that nobody could see was a plan, and a stubbornness that scared even me. But Alexis didn't fall for the plan. She fell for the man reading balance sheets at midnight, and on the nights the doubt got loud, and it got loud, she was the one who'd take my face in both her hands and say, "You're going to build something one day that outlasts you, Malcolm Kincaid." I'd bet my whole life on it. I believed her, because she believed it first. There was another person in those years I should tell you about, because she matters more than either of us knew at the time. Her name was Alicia Malone. She was in my study group, sharp as a blade and twice as quiet about it. The kind of person who solved the problem 3 steps before anyone else in the room, and then let someone louder take the credit. Alicia and I could sit in the same silence for 2 hours over the same problem set, and both come out rested. I thought of her as the best friend I never had to perform for. I found out years later that Alicia had loved me the entire time, that she'd waited, in that patient way that costs a person more than anyone ever sees, for me to notice her as something other than the girl who checked my math. And that the night I told the study group I'd asked Alexis to marry me, Alicia had smiled and hugged me, and told me she was happy for me, and then gone home, and made her quiet peace with it, and never said a word. I didn't know. That is the whole tragedy of me in one sentence, if you want it early. I was a man who could read a market's mood from 1,000 miles away, and could not read the woman sitting across the table. Alexis and I married the summer after graduation, with 40 guests, and a cake her aunt made. We had that empty apartment, and that pot of noodles, and a love that felt, honestly, unbreakable. And then, I went to work. I won't bore you with the climb, because the climb is not the point of this story. I'll only tell you that the thing I built is called Northcrest, and that it started as one idea about how money moves through the places banks had given up on, and that it grew the way a fire grows once it finds the right wind. By the time I was 30, Northcrest had branches in 9 states. By the time I was 34, it had them in 40, and offices on 2 other continents, and a valuation with more zeros than I'd let myself dream about on that apartment floor. And nobody knew it was mine. That part was on purpose, and I need you to understand why, because it's the hinge everything turns on. When I was young, my father, a man who fixed other people's air conditioners for a living and never once complained about it, told me something I never forgot. He said, "Son, money doesn't change a man. It just turns the volume up on whoever he already was." I watched what money did to people. I watched it turn friends into petitioners and strangers into performers. So when Northcrest got big, I did something unusual. I made my best friend the face of it. Darius Pryor and I met the first month I started the company, and there has never been a single day since that I've had to wonder whose side he was on. Darius is charming in all the ways I am not. He gives the interviews. He stands on the stages. To the world, to the markets, to the employees, to the papers. Darius Pryor is Northcrest, and I am some private investor whose name lives in a filing nobody reads. It let me keep something I was terrified of losing. It let me stay a regular man. I kept the modest house on the modest street. I drove a car with 140,000 miles on it. I shopped at the same hardware store where the owner still calls me by my first name and has no earthly idea what I could buy if I felt like it. And it let me do one more thing. It let me be sure. Because here is what I had planned, and it is the part that still catches in my throat. I was going to tell Alexis everything. I was going to take her somewhere quiet and lay the whole truth in her lap. The company, the money, the life we could finally have, and watch her face, and give her the world she'd bet her whole life I would build. That was the dream. That was the reason for every early morning. I just wanted to be certain, first, that her heart was mine, and not the money's. And the reason I wasn't certain, the reason I kept waiting, is that I had started to see the small things, and small things are the only honest things there are. We'd had joint accounts from the beginning. Even after my consulting income quietly grew into something a young couple should never have been able to save, it was a normal thing for that account to be empty, 2 or 3 days after payday. I never made a scene about it, but I paid attention. My priorities were the mortgage, the insurance, the groceries, the gas in both our cars. Her priorities were the manicures, the pedicures, the full sets of lashes, the weekend trips with her friends where the hotel was always nicer than the reason for the trip. I didn't begrudge her a single beautiful thing. I only wanted the bills paid first, and they weren't, and no conversation ever changed it. Eventually, I opened a separate account and suggested we split the bills down the middle, my half and her half, thinking maybe structure would help. And here is the thing I couldn't stop turning over in my mind. When it came time for her half, she was already broke, on payday, overdrawn by hundreds of dollars. On the very morning the money came in. A woman with a good income and a husband who covered more than his share, underwater before the sun was fully up. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself people grow. But a quiet voice I didn't want to hear kept asking me one question. And the question was this: if she does that with a little, what will she do with everything? And I could not, in good conscience, hand a person the keys to a kingdom when I wasn't sure she wouldn't burn it down for the warmth of one good night. So I waited. I told myself I was being wise. Maybe I was. But wisdom and cowardice can wear the same coat, and I've had a long time to wonder which one was really keeping me quiet. The change didn't come all at once. It came the way rot comes to a house, from the inside, in a place you don't check. It started with the friends. Alexis had gotten a marketing job she was good at, and with it came a new circle. Women who measured a life the way you'd measure a countertop, in dollars per square inch. I never liked them. I want to be honest and say it plainly, because I spent too long being polite about it. There was Deja, who had a new bag every week and a job nobody could quite describe. There was Simone, who narrated her own life on the internet as though it were a luxury travel show and lived, I'd later learn, one missed paycheck from the edge the entire time. They were not friends to my wife. They were a mirror that only showed her what she didn't have. For a while, Alexis laughed them off. When they teased her about our little house, she'd defend it. When they posted their hauls and their trips, she'd roll her eyes at me and say, "They're exhausting." I loved her for that. I thought it made her immune, but water finds the crack. Slowly, the teasing stopped being funny to her. They started telling her she was suffering. That was the word they used, suffering. They'd say it while she picked up a check she couldn't really afford because she was too proud to let them see her flinch. In the leaner-looking stretches, when I was pouring everything back into a company she didn't know existed, and our joint account looked thin, she'd sometimes borrow a little from them, and they'd give it and never let her forget it. "For your jobless husband," they'd say, laughing, like it was a joke they'd all agreed was true. My consulting was quiet, so to them, I was a man who sat home and let a good woman carry him. And then, when she needed them, they were suddenly always broke themselves. Broke on the same afternoon they posted a fitting room photo in a store I could have bought. That was the poison, and it was patient. "You need to make your own money," they told her. "You need to feel what it's like to have a man who can handle the bills without flinching. You deserve the life." And a person hears that enough times, from enough smiling mouths, and eventually it stops sounding like an insult to the man who loves her and starts sounding like a door she's been too loyal to open. Then they opened it for her. They introduced her to Bryce Sutton. I heard his name before I ever saw his face, the way you hear a name that's about to matter. Too often, and always with a little too much shine on it. Bryce, who took them all to dinner. Bryce, who drove the car. Bryce, who was, they said, a chief executive, a CEO, a man who moved money for a living and made it look like weather. He wasn't a CEO. I want you to hold on to that, because it's the ground the whole ending stands on. But nobody knew that yet, least of all my wife. The nights started running late. Then they started running into mornings. The texts she used to send me at work. The little ones, the nothing ones, the thinking about you and the, "What do you want for dinner?" that were the small stitches holding a marriage together. Those stopped. I'd look at my phone at 2 in the afternoon, and there'd be nothing, where for 9 years there had always been something. When I asked her about it, gently, over a dinner she barely touched, she gave me a version of the truth, with the important parts filed off. Work thing, girls thing. You wouldn't get it. And then one night I asked one question too many. I asked, quietly, just where she'd been until 1 in the morning on a Tuesday. And for the first time in the entire history of us, Alexis raised her voice at me. "Do you have any idea," she said, and the sound of it stood me straight up, "what it is like to be married to a man who's content, to watch everybody else move up while you sit here being fine with nothing?" She was breathing hard. "I am so tired of being the only one in this house who wants more." I didn't fight her. That's not pride talking. It's just true. I stood there in my own kitchen and let the words land, and I did the thing I always did, which was go quiet and hold the truth in both hands, like something too heavy to lift, and think, not yet, not like this. I still believed I could fix it, with a conversation I hadn't found the right day for. I still believed the woman who took my face in her hands on that apartment floor was in there somewhere, waiting for me to reach her. I want to tell you, I only had my marriage falling apart. I didn't, because at the exact same time, 40 stories up and 100 miles away, Northcrest was burning. It came from outside, a shift in policy across an ocean, a market that lost its nerve, a run of numbers that had nothing to do with how good the company was, and everything to do with fear. Our stock fell. Then it fell again. Then it fell in a way that made serious men in serious rooms start using the word survivable as a question instead of a fact. On paper, in the space of 11 weeks, I lost more money than most people will see named in a lifetime. The company I'd built to outlast me was suddenly something I had to fight, hour by hour, just to keep breathing. I couldn't tell Alexis, not because I didn't want to. God, I wanted to. But how do you sit down across from a woman who's just called you broke and content and say, "Actually, I'm a billionaire, except right now the ground is opening under the whole thing, and I don't know if there'll be a kingdom left to give you." The one truth I'd been saving for the perfect day had turned, overnight, into a thing that might not even be true by the time I said it. So I carried it alone. I carried it to exactly one person, Darius. We sat in his office at 2 in the morning, more nights than I can count. 2 men who'd started with nothing, staring down the possibility of returning to it. And he never once flinched, and I have loved him for 30 years for reasons that all come down to that. And I carried it, without meaning to, back to Alicia Malone. She came into it sideways, the way Grace usually does. In the middle of the worst of it, when we brought in outside advisors to help us hold the line, one of the strategists on the crisis team turned out to be a woman I hadn't seen in 12 years. She looked up from a conference table full of terrified people, and it was Alicia, older, calmer, wearing her competence like a coat that fit. And for the first time in weeks, something in my chest unclenched half an inch. She was extraordinary. While men twice her age panicked, Alicia found the seams. She'd sit with me after the others left and walk me back from the edge, not with comfort exactly, but with the thing that's better than comfort, which is somebody telling you the truth, and then telling you the truth has a floor. Some nights, she'd catch me staring at nothing and she'd say, "Malcolm, eat something. You can't save a company from inside a hole." And I'd eat, because Alicia Malone said to. I know now, the way you know a thing in the rearview mirror, that she was trying to tell me something in all those late rooms. That the way she stayed and steadied me and looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking was a woman finally close enough to say the thing she'd carried since college. She was working up to it. I could feel her working up to it. And I, being the man I am, thought she was just a very good friend who was very good at her job. I was married. My heart was fighting for a woman who was already halfway out the door. Alicia stood right there in the light, and I looked straight through her. And I will carry the shame of that for as long as I carry anything. So that was my life in those weeks. A company on fire I couldn't talk about. A wife pulling away I couldn't reach. And a good woman beside me I couldn't see. And through all of it, I held on to one thing like a man holding a rope in a storm. The promise. I'm yours, through anything. She'd said it on the floor when we had nothing. Surely, I thought, she meant it now, when it looked like we had nothing again. Then she stayed out for 3 days. 3 days. She'd never done a night, not once in 9 years. I called until calling felt like begging. I texted things I'm not proud of. I sat up in that little house and imagined every kind of accident, because loving someone means the fear finds the door before the anger does. On the third evening, headlights swung across the front window, and I was up and out of the chair before I'd decided to be, and I opened the door with my whole heart in my hands. She wasn't hurt. She was calm. That was the part that told me everything before she said a word. She walked past me into our living room, looked around the house I'd bought us like it was a place she'd already left, and said, "I'm just here to get my things, Malcolm. That's all. It's over." I don't remember all of what I said. I remember it wasn't loud. I remember asking her how, and asking her why, and asking her about a promise made on a floor by a girl I still loved. And I remember what she gave me back, because those words are set into me now like initials in wet concrete. "I can't keep doing this," she said. "I've given you my best years, and I've got nothing to show for it. I am not carrying a broke man to my grave." She was already pulling a suitcase from the hall closet, already packed. She'd come home to leave, not to talk. "I'm tired of waiting for you to become somebody. I found somebody." And then, when I said the only thing left in me, that she was still my wife, that she still carried my name, she laughed. Not cruelly even, worse than cruelly, tiredly, like a woman explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Kincaid never got me anything," she said. 9 years, and I can't use it anywhere. What's the point of a name that won't open a single door? She zipped the bag. "By the end of the month I'll be Alexis Sutton, and people are going to look at me when I say it." I stood in my own living room and watched my wife trade my name for another man's, like it was a coat that had gone out of style. And here is the thing that should have broken me and didn't, because the universe has a sense of humor darker than any of us deserve. The name she was throwing in the trash was, at that very moment, on the founding documents of one of the largest companies in the country. Alexis was giving up the name Kincaid because it had never opened a door for her. She had no idea it was the key to every door there was. She wheeled the suitcase toward the front. Her coat was folded over her arm. There was a black car idling at the curb with its headlights on, and a man leaning against it in a suit that cost more than he'd ever tell her, waiting on my wife like she was his to collect. I walked out to see him. I don't fully know why. Maybe I wanted to look the future in the eye. Maybe I just wanted to see the face of the man worth more to her than 9 years and a promise. And the second I saw him, my whole body went cold. Not because I didn't know him, but because I did. His name really was Bryce Sutton. That part he hadn't lied about. Everything else he had. Because Bryce Sutton was not a CEO. Bryce Sutton was a branch manager. A mid-level manager of the Northcrest office 2 towns over. My company. My building. My name on the check that paid him every 2 weeks. I knew his face, from a leadership review I'd sat in on quietly, in the back, a private investor observing, the way Darius let me do sometimes. I knew his numbers. I knew he ran an average branch averagely, and told a very good story about himself. And he didn't know me at all. He'd never known me. To Bryce Sutton, I was just some tired man in a stained gray shirt, standing in the doorway of a run-down house. The pathetic broke husband his girlfriend was finally leaving. He looked at me the way you look at something you've stepped over. Then he pushed off the car, opened the passenger door for my wife with a little flourish, and gave me a smile that was 90% teeth. "No hard feelings, man," he said. "She just needs a certain kind of life." I could have said one sentence. One. I could have told that man exactly who signed the bottom of his world, and watched 30 years of composure come off both their faces at once. I stood there with it loaded, and I felt how good it would feel, and I understood in the same breath how little it would actually be worth. There are some truths you don't waste on people who've already shown you exactly who they are. So I didn't say anything. I let Bryce Sutton hold the door for my wife. I let Alexis fold herself into the seat and not look back at me the way you look back at a life. I let that gleaming car pull away from the curb of the house I'd bought us, and I stood in the dark with my hands empty and every word I could have said still sitting behind my teeth. And then I went inside, and I sat on the floor of the living room, the floor where all of this had started, and for a long time I did not move at all. I'd love to tell you I was fine. I wasn't. Grief doesn't care what your net worth is. For weeks I moved through that empty house like a man underwater. I'd reach for my phone to text her something at 2 in the afternoon, and remember there was no one on the other end anymore. I signed the papers when they came. She took the maiden name, and then, soon after, his. Alexis Sutton. I read it on the document and felt the last stitch pull loose. Darius all but moved into my life. He'd show up with food I didn't want and make me eat it. He said one thing in those weeks I've never forgotten. "You spent your whole life afraid the money would show people who they really were," he said. Well, it did. It just showed you last. And Alicia stayed. Not close. She was too careful for that, and I was too raw to notice if she had. But she was there, steadying the company beside me, catching me when I drifted, telling me to eat, telling me the truth had a floor. Whatever she'd been working up to say, she folded it back away when Alexis left, because she is a person of extraordinary decency, and she was not going to say "I love you" to a man bleeding out on the floor of a marriage. She just quietly made sure I lived long enough to hear it someday. So I did the only thing I knew how to do with pain, which was work. I poured myself into Northcrest the way I'd poured myself into it at 26, except this time, there was nothing waiting for me at home to make me stop. And slowly, the way a fever finally breaks, the tide turned. The policy that had gutted us reversed. The market found its nerve. The steps we'd taken in the dark started to hold in the light. Northcrest didn't just survive. It came back stronger than it had ever been, because a company that nearly dies and doesn't learns things about itself that easy money never teaches. But saving it cost me the one thing I'd spent my whole life protecting. To pull the company all the way back, to steady the markets and the employees and the men in the serious rooms. Someone with real authority had to step into the light and show the world there was a steady hand on the wheel. Darius couldn't do it alone anymore. The moment called for the owner, and so, after 15 years in the shadows, I let them file the disclosure and put my face on the statement and stood, at last, in the exact spotlight I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Malcolm Kincaid, founder and sole owner of Northcrest. The reclusive billionaire nobody had ever seen. The story ran everywhere. It ran the way those stories run. The mystery man, the empire hidden in plain sight, the name behind the name. And it ran, of course, with a photograph. My face, finally attached to the fortune. I didn't do it to be seen by her. I want that on the record. I did it because 40,000 people worked for Northcrest, and I owed them a company that would still be there in the morning. But you cannot control where the truth travels once you let it out of your hands. And the truth traveled, that week, to a branch office 2 towns over, where a mid-level manager named Bryce Sutton opened a newsletter at his desk and saw the face of the man who owned the chair he was sitting in, and recognized, a full beat too late, the tired man in the stained gray shirt he'd told, "She just needs a certain kind of life." I'm told he went very white and very quiet. I'm told he didn't come back from lunch. I didn't have to lift a finger. I want to be clear about that, because it's the part I'm actually proud of. I never fired Bryce Sutton. I never made a single call about him. His life came apart on its own, the way lives built on lies do. The flashy car he couldn't afford. The title he'd never held. The debt he'd been outrunning with a smile. When the woman on his arm found out the man she'd traded a name for wasn't a CEO but a branch manager living 3 payments from empty, she did what people like that always do. She looked for the exit, and when she went looking, she found out the rest of it too. She found out what Kincaid was worth. I heard it came to her all at once, in a single afternoon, that Bryce was a fraud, and that the name she'd thrown away like an old coat was the most valuable name in every room she'd ever wanted to be let into. That she had stood in a doorway and told a billionaire she wasn't going to carry a broke man to her grave. That she'd left the kingdom for a boy who'd told her he owned a castle he actually cleaned. Alexis came back. Of course she came back. They always come back once the mirage burns off and the real desert shows itself. She was waiting outside the Northcrest building on a Thursday, in the good coat, with the careful makeup, and when I came out she said my name the way she used to say it on the apartment floor, and for 1 second, I'll be honest with you, 1 second, the 22-year-old in me leaned toward it. Then I remembered the suitcase. I remembered I am not carrying a broke man to my grave. I remembered a woman who left a man on the floor of his own house and didn't look back, and I understood that the person in front of me now wasn't sorry she'd hurt me. She was sorry about the arithmetic. "Malcolm," she said, and her eyes were wet, and I believe the tears were real, because grief over a lost fortune feels exactly like grief. I didn't know. If you had just told me, "That's the whole thing, Alexis," I said, and my voice was not cruel, because I was past cruel. "You shouldn't have needed to know. You promised to stay when you thought I had nothing. That was the only promise that ever mattered. And you broke it in a doorway to a man you'd known for a season, because he had a shinier car." I looked at her for a long moment, at the face I'd once held in both my hands. "You didn't leave a billionaire. You didn't even know I was one. You left a man you thought was broke. That's not a mistake. That's an answer." She didn't have anything to say to that, because there wasn't anything. I told her I hoped she'd be well, and I meant it, and then I walked to a car that was, finally, worth more than 140,000 miles, and I did not look back the way you look back at a life. There was nothing there to look back at. There hadn't been for a long time. I gave her a settlement she had no legal right to expect. Not because I owed her. I didn't. Because my father's voice was in my ear. And because a man who buys himself the satisfaction of watching someone starve has not risen above anything. He's just found a taller place to be small from. I let her keep her dignity, which was more than she'd left me, and then I let her go for good. You want to know the part I didn't see coming, even then? It was Alicia. It was always going to be Alicia. It took me an embarrassingly long time. I've established, I think, that I am slow about the only things that matter. But one evening months later, after the company was safe, and my life had gone quiet in the good way, for the first time in years, Alicia and I were sitting in my office, long after everyone had gone, and she was laughing at something, laughing the way she never had in college, because in college, she was too busy protecting a heart I didn't know she'd handed me, and I looked at her. I really looked at her, the way you're supposed to look at someone. And I saw the whole thing at once. The study group, the quiet, the patience that had cost her more than I could count. The woman who'd stood in the light beside me through the worst weeks of my life, and asked for nothing, and steadied everything. How long? I asked her. It was all I could get out. Alicia Malone looked at me for a moment, deciding, I think, whether to make her peace with it one more time, and then she decided not to. Since a library in October, she said. In our last year, you dropped a stack of books, and I stopped to help you pick them up, and Alexis got there first. She smiled, and it was a little sad and a lot brave. I've been getting there second my whole life, Malcolm. I did not let her get there again. Money doesn't change a man. It just turns up the volume on whoever he already was. It turned Alexis up until I could finally hear her clearly. It turned Bryce up until the whole world could. And it turned me up too, until I could finally hear my own heart telling me the difference between a woman who loves what you might build and a woman who loved you on the floor with nothing but a pot of noodles between you. A name is not worth what it can open for you. A name is worth who's willing to carry it with you when it opens nothing at all. So let me ask you honestly, before you go, if someone you loved threw you out because they thought you had nothing, and then found out you were worth everything, would you take them back? Or would you do what I did and let them go and keep the peace you finally found? Tell me in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one.